Well, welcome to the reckless grace of God, friends. Aren't you glad to be here? Isn't that cool? Thank the band again for helping lead us in worship and to celebrate all that gift. We want to welcome our online community. We're always grateful for your presence. We certainly are grateful that you're here this morning, and I hope you're willing to put up with our stuff for another couple of weeks. Our temporary situation is just that. We're very excited about some of the modern technology that's going to help us in a few weeks, but if you'll be willing to put up with us, we would sure appreciate it. If you're new here in the sanctuary, welcome as well. We're so grateful you've chosen to come. Hope this time will be a blessing for you. You are a great and rich blessing for us. Be sure to stop by the New Here desk. If you haven't already done that, we sure want to encourage you to do that. You'll find a great friend and learn a little bit more about the church, and I hope that you'll avail yourself of that. If you haven't already signed in with your Fast Pass, I sure want to encourage you to do that as well. If you don't have a Fast Pass, there's these blue cards that are just sitting in the pews there. They say, tell us you're here. If you don't mind letting us know you're here, we would sure appreciate that. And if you want to leave a prayer request or joy, man, we're always happy to pray for you. We pray over those every single week, so I hope that you'll avail yourself of that gift as well. There's nothing quite like getting prayed for and prayed with as we celebrate all that God is doing for us. Well, friends, reckless grace. Isn't it amazing? This reckless grace of God. It comes to us without anything we can do, say, or earn, and it is an amazing blessing for us. And so we kicked this series off last Sunday, and didn't Doug do a phenomenal job of helping us start this series? Yes, indeed. Helping us better understand Him, helping us better understand this cause and this understanding of we've all got stuff. You found your belly button last week, right? You got one? Everybody got one? I think we do, right? And so we come to understand that we all have this stuff, and that just makes us human, it makes us normal, and it makes us God's gift for one another. And so we want to celebrate that opportunity. If you haven't already pulled out your sermon notes, I want to encourage you to do that. If you've got that on the app or in your bulletin, a part of what Doug reminded us of is that every last one of us, you just write this down. We borrow this from our Celebrate Recovery friends, right? That every last one of us has a hurt or a habit or a hang-up. Some of us have hurts that just bother us and kind of live with us. Others of us have habits that aren't quite as they should be and just kind of stick with us, right? And some of us have these hang-ups that just keep us hung up in life. And a part of what that means is we're all in this together, and we all need to recognize that. And I just want to thank Doug for helping us recognize that. Part of what he pointed out last week, of course, was that the prodigal son had this fear, right? He had this fear of, man, I don't want to be like Dad. I don't want to hang out in this dysfunctional family, so I'm leaving, right? And then even after he left, he lived into this fear that I don't want to be just every day bored, doldrum, so I'm going to frivolously give all this stuff away and interact in these kinds of ways that aren't helpful. We've all got some kind of fear like that that's hindering us, that's holding us back, that's preventing us from living into the fullness of God. And a part of our point in this series, Reckless Grace, is a way to recognize that the prodigal son is us, and that every last one of us has those fears with a hurt or a habit or a hang-up. And we want to look at that alongside of the 12-step program, because a part of what we recognize is while the 12 steps are tremendously important for folks in recovery, they are deeply spiritual principles by which to live for all of us. And we want to claim that, right? We want to celebrate that. And so as we looked at the prodigal son last week and discovered his fear and discovered how he kind of went off into the hinterlands and kind of squandered everything, we picked back up with him this morning again in Luke chapter 15, beginning in verse 14. And what happens to him in these verses is often what happens to every last one of us. So follow along, if you will, in the Bible that you brought, whether on your phone or in the book that's in your hand, beginning in verse 14. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. Now, friends, that's every last one of us. We're all in need. We've all got something in this hurt, habit, or hang-up that causes us to be in need, and we need God's reckless grace. So the son's going to teach us how to begin that journey. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. Not exactly a glamorous opportunity, right? He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. Often in the midst of our hurts and hang-ups and habits, that's what it feels like. Nobody's willing to give us anything. Nobody's willing to help us. Nobody's willing to go there with us. And a part of our journey is taking ownership of who we are and how we are. Verse 17, but when he came to himself, and other translations say when he came to his senses. So when he came to himself, when he realized, man, this isn't working. This isn't going the way I'd hoped. He does something, right? He says to himself, how many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands. Friends, this is the gift that God has for us today, that we indeed are in receipt of God's reckless grace. Thanks be to God for that opportunity. So, he realizes, man, it's all bad. Nothing's working. I've spent all I've got. I am spent myself. It's not working. My hunch is every last one of us has found ourselves at that point. Maybe it was in adolescence, maybe it was in young adulthood, maybe it was last week, I don't know. But every one of us has at some point felt as if, man, everything I put my eggs in that basket, everything's not working. It's not going as I'd hoped or planned. And every last one of us has at some point felt like, I'm at the end of my rope. I don't know what else to do. I don't know how to move forward. I don't know what the next step is. And we come to ourselves like the son does. And when he comes to himself, he kind of admits that, right? Man, I don't have anything, but even my dad's hired hands have got at least some pods to eat, right? Have at least got something. I know. And so he admits. And then as he thinks about it, he works out that speech, right? Dad, man, I don't belong in your house. I don't deserve to be your son. I don't deserve any of this. And you can just feel his dilemma, right? You can sense that he's at his wit's end, the end of his rope, that he's at the bottom of the barrel, that he's in the deepest pit, right? And if ever you've been there, you know what it feels like, right? You keep thinking, if I'll just try one more thing, or if I'll just try this one thing, or if I could just keep this going. And at some point, we have literally gotten to the end. And we have to then say, something has got to change, right? So that's what he does. So he gives us a powerful image of the beginning of the 12-step journey. And a part of what I want to talk about this morning is the ways in which 12-step are not only tremendously helpful in recovery, but are deeply spiritual for our own faith journey. That every last one of them can be applied for every last one of us who profess faith in Jesus, that there's something valuable about them. So let's spend some time unpacking that. What I want to say, we're going to cover 3 today. We'll cover 4 or 5 next week, and then the rest of them the third week from now. And we won't literally go over all 12 one by one, but today I want to talk about what I would refer to as the foundational ones. Because here's the reality. In the 12 steps, we have to understand all 12 are important, right? We can't just sort of go, I want to do 4 and 6 and 8, or I really think that number 1 would be helpful in number 10, and I'll just kind of go from start to finish, right? It doesn't work that way, right, Shay? It doesn't work that way, right? So, but what I do want to say is these first 3, they're foundational. They literally are like the house where, the doors and the windows and the roof and the sheetrock and all, that's very important in the house. But if we don't have the foundation, we're not going very far, right? So I want to talk about these foundational ones, the first 3. So the prodigal son, gives us a great analogy of these first 3. If you've got your notes, just jot this down. Just simple concept. So the first step is this. I need to admit that I can't do this anymore. I need to admit that I'm not getting it. I need to admit that I am incapable of taking care of this situation. I've got to admit it. That's what the son did, right? man, just think of my father's hired hands, and man, I don't want to feed these pigs anymore, and I'm done with this. And so he admits it. And this is hard, right? Because none of us want to admit that we've got a problem. None of us want to admit that there's a dilemma in our life. Even if it's simply a hurt. You hurt me with the way you treated me. Or I've got this habit that just, it's not horrible, but man, it just kind of sidesteps my journey in my life. We don't want to do it. The Apostle Paul, who wrote all those letters, or most of the letters in the New Testament, he put it this way when he wrote to the church at Rome in Romans chapter 7. He literally just said, look, I don't even understand my own practices, my own actions. I don't understand them. I do the stuff I hate. I don't do the stuff I want. Hello. That's what makes us human. That's who we are. We are those kind of folk who say and do things we don't really intend to say or do, and at some point we find ourselves where we didn't want to be, right? And some of us in this room are saying to ourselves, well, I'm not an alcoholic. I don't have a drug problem. What's this all about? And I simply want to say, addiction strikes a heck of a lot more than just in alcohol and drugs, right? Strikes in gambling, strikes in shopping, hello, strikes in even things like that we would normally think are very positive, like exercise or work, right? Something that in and of itself seems very positive, but I can take it to the nth degree, to the degree that it literally sucks the life out of me. But the other reality is this. This is not just about addiction. This is about hurts and hang-ups and other sets of circumstances in our lives that every last one of us has that prohibits us from knowing the fullness of the life and the love of Jesus. And so, part of what we have to understand is we've got to admit, and we struggle with that because we, no offense, fellas, because we all live here together, but in suburbia, we like hanging pretty pictures that cover our frailties, right? We like to put up nice clothing and cloth and pretty homes and pretty cars and even pretty families because we don't want anybody to know that we've got a problem. And so we don't talk about it, we don't deal with it, we don't want anybody else to see it, and we sure as heck aren't going to admit it. Nobody has to own that right now, but it's our reality, okay? Because it makes us feel weak. It makes us feel as though we're not the way we're supposed to be. It makes us seem as though we're not the way we ought to be, right? Paul, the apostle, had something to say about that as well. He wrote to the church at Corinth another letter, and in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, he said, look, I want you to know that I'm all right with being weak, because when I'm weak, I'm strong. And what he meant by that was, I am not it. God is. I can't do it, but God can. It's not about me, it's about God. That's the admission, friends. That's what the Son did, and that's what the 12 steps call us to, is this admission that what we thought was working, what we thought might make it right or better, is clearly not, and I simply need to admit it. That's the first step. The second step is equally difficult, but I think slightly simpler or more straightforward, and that is this. Step 2 is believe. Believe that there is a higher power. For those who follow Jesus, we believe that's God found in Jesus Christ. Believe that there is a higher power who can help me with this dilemma. That's what the Son did. I know. I'll go back to my dad's house. I didn't care for my dad, and I kind of wanted to get out from under his roof, but I have realized my dad's got something to provide. My dad's got something to offer. My dad's got something to say. I believe that. And so that's our second step, is we've got to believe that God has something more for us than what we've been trying. Because again, the reality is what we've been trying is not working, right? Paul, the apostle, man, he's got stuff to say about this. He writes yet to a third church in Philippi. In Philippians chapter 2, Paul says this, that God is the one who enables us both to want and to live into God's greater purposes. God does that, not us. And we've got to kind of accept this beautiful gift and believe that God can. And that's a journey. It doesn't sort of happen overnight. It doesn't happen in an instant. But it only happens when I'm willing to take that step, right? And I need that help because I can't do it myself, right? So when I do it, then I begin to recognize, man, that's almost like faith. That's like this gift called grace. I can't earn it. I can't earn faith. I don't deserve it. That's what that song sings about, right? And then Paul writes about it when he writes to yet a fourth church in Ephesians chapter 2. He says, you have been saved by grace through faith. And it's not something that we did. We can't boast about that. We can't brag about that. This is God's gift. And all we do is receive it. And when we receive it, it begins to change our hearts and our minds in such a way that we can step away from that hurt or that habit or that hang-up. But it doesn't come easily, right? This is a part of our human condition that makes it hard. And that's where step 3 comes in. You know, step 1 is foundational, and we can't get anywhere unless we start there. Step 2 becomes important because we need to have the faith to believe that it can happen. And then step 3 is so simple. But it's so hard, right? Step 3 is trust. Trust that God's got this. Trust that God is the one who can help me get beyond this point. Trust. It's so easy to talk about, isn't it? It's so easy even to believe. I believe that I can trust. I believe that this can happen. But then there's that deal about actually doing it. It's hard. Because if you are like me, you got control issues. Right? I mean, what's funny is that this is age old. I mean, this goes way back. So there's this wisdom writer that writes the Proverbs, right? And in Proverbs, we've heard this great text in Proverbs chapter 3. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart, right? Don't lean on your own understanding. That's what got you in problems, leaning on your own understanding, right? Trust in God. Acknowledge God in all of your ways, and God's going to get this, right? It's so fun to say that. It's so fun to even want to believe that, right? But then there's that deal about giving up control. I know this is hard to believe, but and I don't have a diagnosis at all, but I have OCD tendencies. Can you tell? I mean, I got to play with my clothes. I got to, get things all in order. And the staff can clearly attest to this. And my family, God bless them, they get to put up with it every single day, right? I've got to have things in just the right place. I've got to have things just the way I wanted them. I've got to check the doors every night before I go to bed. Even when Kay says to me, I've already locked the doors, I've already checked the doors, I've got to go check them because I got OCD. Anybody, got that hang up? I do. And then some of you may notice that every once in a while I check my phone because I've got a phone, and I love my phone, and I love checking my phone because it's there, and if it's there, then I can check it. And if I see that there's something there, then I can check that too because there's a thing that's on my desk, and it's on the top, and I can see it, and then I can have it because it's on my phone. Do you have a phone? Do you like to use your phone? I like to use my phone because it's problematic though, right? And anytime I get somewhere and people kind of take notice, they notice that I like the phone because it controls my life. When I don't trust God, then stuff begins to tumble and fall. When I choose not to live into that belief that God actually can help me, then life gets better if I'll trust. But it's a daily, probably in most circumstances an hourly, and maybe even in other circumstances a minute-by-minute journey. God, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to trust that this is, I believe I want to. I want to do this. God, I want to trust you. This is what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And it's the hardest thing in the world. In the big book for AA, they kind of use this analogy. In the big book, they talk about an actor. Actors love to be on stage and to act, right? But an actor who has control issues wants to work the lights, wants to direct from the back, wants to work the soundboard, wants to choreograph everything, wants to make everything work together. And guess what? It can't work that way. When we try to control every aspect of our lives, guess what happens? Ball after ball after ball keeps dropping. But if I'm willing to give up control because I'm willing to trust that God knows better, has a better way, has a better understanding, man, so much better. Jesus had this vision about this. Here's what Jesus said. In Matthew chapter 16, Jesus says, if you try to win your life, you're going to lose everything. But if you'll lose your life for my sake, man, you'll gain true life. That's this gift. It's the gift of trust. And if we'll begin the journey by admitting and believing and then trusting, we have joined an amazing opportunity for fullness of life. And the gift that comes, as we'll discover next week, is God's reckless grace. This amazing gift that just will overwhelm us and never ending in that love to fill us with God's gift of life and love. Now, I'm simple, so I got to narrow it down. 3 things are too much for me, so I want to put it this way, because this is what I think the prodigal son said. The simplest way I know to remember this is to think these 2 words. Jot these down in your notes. Admit and submit. Admit I got a problem. Admit something's not working. Admit what I had and thought was the way to go is not working. Admit that. And then submit to the powerful gift of God's love and God's grace. And friends, there's so many in this room who can tell you this story, how that begins to change everything. And a part of what we've got to get over is that barrier of belief that says, I'm weak if I admit this. I'm weak if I can't do this on my own. I'm weak and worthless if I can't do this. We've got to get over that. Because here's the reality, as your notes indicate. There is no weakness in 12 steps. Only courage. Courage. It takes courage to admit I'm not whole. It takes courage to acknowledge I can't do this. It takes courage to recognize somebody else, God in Jesus, can. That's courage, friends. And some of us may be sitting here going, man, I don't know. I'm not brave enough. I'm not strong enough. I'm not sure I can do that. And here's what I want to own about courage. Man, some of us think courage is this thing that I have to have everything together in order to do that. But the reality is courage is kind of different. Here's the way I look at courage. It's there in your notes. Courage is the willingness to confront fear. Because remember, we've all got the fear. The willingness to confront that fear, whatever it is. I'm afraid you're going to know me. I'm afraid what you're going to think of me. I'm afraid of what you may perceive of me. I'm afraid. To confront that and to act anyway. That's what the 12 steps are. The courage to confront whatever may be that hurt, that habit, that hang-up, and to move forward with it. That's what the serenity prayer is all about, right? The Reinhold Niebuhr prayer. The serenity prayer is the way to live into that courage. If you'll call up the serenity prayer, I want to ask and invite all of us to just say that prayer together. Will you say that out loud with me? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Friends, that's the beginning of the journey. I wonder if you might listen to the powerful testimony of some whom we heard from last week, who want to share with you again this week of the ways they've been living into admit and submit. Watch.
He too was suffering from this, and that I couldn't fix this, and that the only thing that I could do was really ultimately support his sobriety as much as I possibly could.
I went to help people while I was addicted. My addictions were not so debilitating that I was not able to be successful. And so here I thought I could, another way of manipulating things, that I was going to go get help, help other people. And God had another plan. And he drove me to recovery by being around those people, and they helped me.
Don't be afraid to ask for help. Having wrestled with this a lot in my 20s, it was hard for me to come back in my 40s and realize that this was something that I needed to get help with again. And it took the loss of a friend of mine from suicide for me to say, I need to make sure that I don't ever get to that point.
You know, the change doesn't happen quickly. It doesn't happen overnight. You didn't become an addict in one day, so it's not going to be fixed that quickly, and you really have to be patient with it.
And it's been my experience that I'm very much drawn to those people who say the same thing, that they in fact don't have it all together, in fact that they needed help. And that allowed me to start my own journey and say, if that person was brave enough to say to their neighbor or their congregation that in fact they have struggled with things in their life, that I could say the same of myself. And so once you kind of lose the illusion of everything's going really good right now, and it always has been and it always will be, you're able to embrace recovery.
And I can't tell you enough on how you're not alone. You're just not alone. There is someone who's going through something similar, or who is having doubts and fears about being known and is ashamed. And I just want you to know that you don't have to be.
God's reckless grace is that gift of the journey. You know, the prodigal son came to himself. He realized there was something not right, he admitted. And then he began the journey of submitting to God's grace and mercy and love. And that reckless love transformed who he was. I pray today that you'll begin that journey. At the bottom of your notes or on the app page, there's a challenge for this week. Discover a way to help understand God's reckless grace by admitting and submitting. And then maybe if you've got some time, read Jacob's story in Genesis chapter 32, where he wrestles with God and he becomes changed because he was willing to admit and to submit. What a gift God's reckless grace is. Will you pray with me? Holy and amazing God, thank you. Thank you that you love us so much that you're willing to claim our hearts and our lives. Thank you that you're willing to offer us your reckless grace. Help us, God, this day and the next, to become willing and open to start the journey, to overcome our fear by first admitting we got an issue, we got a hurt, a hang up, a habit, and then to submit to who you are and what you can do each and every day of the rest of our lives. Thank you, God, for that powerful gift. In Jesus' name we now pray. Amen.